Everybody, what a nice gathering today, and for a good reason too. We have an island treasure speaking with us today, Joe Hale. I'm Bill Tramposh. I'm the executive director of the NHA. I want to give a very brief introduction and then have Joe talk about an amazing initiative that he's head of. But first, Joe, I want to say thank you, MS Worthington Trust Foundation, for sponsoring this, as well as Novation Media. These are our sponsors for our free brown bag series. Joe received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Hanover College and is a graduate of Harvard University's Institute for Nonprofit Administration. Prior to creating Global BrightLight Foundation, Joe served as Vice President and Chief Communications Officer of Synergy Corporation. That's now Duke Energy. He was also president of Synergy Foundation. Currently, Joe serves as president of Global BrightLight Foundation. It's an NGO that provides solar lanterns to off-grid families around the world, and Joe is a tireless fundraiser on its behalf, as well as on behalf of many not-for-profits, both here and in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Contemporary Art Center, the March of Dimes Foundation, the Taft Museum of Art. He has been a trustee and frequent chairman of more than a dozen nonprofit organizations, including the National Underground Freedom Center, the Cincinnati Zoo, the Holocaust and Humanities Center, Hanover College, and the Ohio Arts Council. Closer to home, Joe has been an active supporter and trustee of the Theater Workshop of Nantucket, the Community Foundation for Nantucket, the Sconset Chapel, the Sconset Trust, and the Egan Maritime Institute. I'm really happy to say that Joe and Linda are not only friends of ours, Peggy's and mine, but also good supporters of the NHA too. So would you help welcome Joe Hale today?
Wanted to provide some context and first tell you a story. Several decades ago, a young woman in Louisville, Kentucky woke up with a headache, and it was a very hot, humid August day. She didn't want to take any medicine because she was entering her 9th month of pregnancy, but yet this headache wouldn't stop. And it got worse and worse and worse as the day went on. And ultimately, she was taken to the hospital where 12 hours later, she was paralyzed from the neck down and diagnosed with polio and placed in an iron lung. The first visitor that she had at the hospital was the March of Dimes, someone from the March of Dimes, asking, what can we do? The lady was my mother, and my dad at the time was a mailman. He was a rural route mail carrier. And we had everything we needed, but in retrospect, it was just what we needed, not a lot of extra. And so the March of Dimes said, what can we do to help out? And they really did an extraordinary job of helping our family, both monetarily. They would pay, my mother eventually gained the use of her upper body. She spent the rest of her life in a wheelchair, but they would send a cab every day so that she could swim, and that was just good therapy. Even though she was paralyzed from the waist down, she could still swim, crawl, and breaststroke, and so she would swim every day just to build her body up. They also sent her to Warm Springs, Georgia for 6 months, where President Roosevelt was, where polio patients could learn to live independently in a wheelchair. How do you do housework? How do you cook? How do you clean? How do you do those things around the house in a wheelchair? And so we eventually built our own house, and some of the counters were a little bit lower, but she eventually learned how to drive. She had my brother 3.5 years later, and it was a normal life. It was a totally normal life. But one of my earliest memories is pushing her wheelchair down the street in New Albany, Indiana, with those little cards collecting dimes for the March of Dimes. Many of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but that was fundraising back in the day. And we'd collect those cards and send them into the March of Dimes, and literally millions of dollars were collected. I realized that I was a beneficiary of charity very early on, and I appreciated it so much. But it was really ingrained in my head, so that when I became an adult, a young adult, one of my priorities was you got to find a way to give back. It's very, very important. And so it's one of the reasons I think Linda and I have both tried to be as involved in the communities where we've lived as possible. We've been coming to Nantucket for 35, 38 years now, and we hadn't really been able to kind of engage and get involved into the last 10 years or so, and now that we're spending 7, 8 months, I can't quite get Linda over the winter hump yet, but I'm still trying. It's been a real opportunity to kind of give back to Nantucket too. So I had this varied career where I basically couldn't keep a job. In my 20s, I started out as a 7th and 10th grade English teacher in Indiana, and then we moved to Germany where I taught on an Air Force base. Came back and worked in a little town and worked in Indianapolis for the Indiana Arts Commission, moved down to a little town called New Harmony, Indiana. I don't know if anybody's heard about it. Maybe some friends from Indiana have, but it was the site of 2 utopian experiments in the early 1800s. One was kind of based on science and education, and the other one was more of a cultural utopian attempt. One was celibate, so obviously it didn't last. The other one lasted a little bit longer, but as a result, it was a place of incredible thinking and innovation and wonderful development of new ideas in New Harmony. The reason I tell you that, there was a woman there, Tish Mumford, who had a farm outside of New Harmony, and her grandfather had been the governor of Indiana, Governor Sinclair. Late 1800s, he bought the tip of Hyannisport, ultimately sold some of the land to Joe Kennedy, where that Kennedy compound is now, but really developed the whole tip of Hyannisport. And they kept some houses there. And we had 2 little boys at the time, and we weren't making a lot of money, and so Tish said, well, go stay in our house after we all are gone in September, and just, we'd never been out to the Cape before. And so we drove out all night. No money for that motel, so you drive all night to get here, and we ended up spending a week on the Cape in Hyannisport. While we were there, a friend of ours who actually worked in New Harmony too, a guy named Rob Benchley, Rob called, he was on Nantucket, and Rob said, you got to come to Nantucket, just come over for the day. And it was that quintessential experience that you've heard over and over and over again. People come to this island, they get off the ferry, and they go, this just feels right. I'm going to figure out a way to come back here. And that's exactly what we said. And, we over the years have stayed in some god-awful places on Nantucket, but we did keep coming back. And so it's really, it feels like home to us now. When I left my career in the energy field, I had no clue what I was going to do next. And I explored a lot of opportunities, and one day about 6 years ago, Jim Rogers, who until recently was the chairman and CEO of Duke Energy, we were out in Colorado, and we both were meeting for breakfast, and we both happened to read an article in the New York Times that morning about a woman in Kenya who had 5 children, and her cell phone had become very, very important to her. And you might say, well, why does she need a cell phone in Kenya? And it's interesting because not only are cell phones the communication between people in Africa now, it's also the banking system. And so if I have $5 credit on my cell phone and I owe you $1, I can transfer the $1 that I owe you to your cell phone. So they're not building banks, but they're virtual banks. And so there's that transfer of currency that takes place actually on people's cell phone. The other thing they're able to do is they can go online on these cell phones, and these are 4, 5, and 6 generation ago cell phones compared to what many of us are using today, but they still work. And they will go online and find out how much chickens are selling for in the market that day. Or they'll look at the weather forecast because they want to work in the field for the next couple of days. They want to know what the weather's like. Or perhaps they had a son move from their village to Nairobi, and it's a way to stay in touch with their children. So that cell phone was very, very important. But this woman with 5 kids and living very remotely, in order to get her cell phone charged every 2 weeks, she would leave her kids, walk 3 miles. She would pay $3 to a bush taxi and ride 6 hours on that bush taxi to a village that had electricity that could charge her cell phone. But because there was so much demand to charge her cell phone, she had to leave it for 2 days. She had to pay $3, 6 hours back on the bush taxi, and bush taxis are not comfortable or pleasant, and then walk 3 miles back to her home, repeat it again. So she was paying $12 in order to get a 25-cent charge on her cell phone, and she was doing it twice a month. She was paying in essence, $25 a month to run her cell phone. She was still burning kerosene lanterns in her house, and these are basically Coke cans, the top's been cut off. They put a wick, put kerosene in there, and that's the light in the home. It provides minimal light, but it also provides a tremendous amount of kerosene smoke in your home too. So somebody approached this woman about a device that was a very simple solar lantern. And it was expensive. It was, at that point, it was about $60, but it would provide light in her home, and it would also charge her cell phone. So she sold a goat, and she saved up, and she bought this solar lantern, and it transformed her life and her family's life. Because not only did she save time, but she no longer was burning kerosene in their home, and kerosene causes incredible irritation of the eyes and also respiratory problems as well. She wasn't burning that, and you do have to buy the kerosene to put in these little lamps, so she was saving money doing that too. But she also started a little business in her village for 25 cents. She would charge other people's cell phones on her solar lantern. So she had a little, very entrepreneurial, and she started a little business that was making some money. So at that point, a $60 lantern transformed lives. So Jim Rogers and I, we were having breakfast that day, and we said, that's a pretty simple solution to a major problem. I wonder if there's anything that we could do to help this effort. And so we realized that there are 1.3 billion people in the world without access to electricity. 1.3 billion. It's a huge, huge market. And we said, let's find out who's providing solar lanterns, and let's support them. Let's try to raise money and support the people that are doing it. Well, this was 6 years ago, and quite frankly, there weren't a lot of NGOs, not-for-profit organizations out there doing that. And so we said, our feeling was the last thing the world needs is another not-for-profit organization. I mean, they're proliferating like crazy here on Nantucket. They're proliferating like crazy everywhere. And we thought, we don't need another 501c3. We need to find out who's doing the best job at this and support them. But we couldn't find that organization at that time, so we said, let's try to get smart at least. Let's try to get smarter. And so we partnered with the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York, which runs the Bronx Zoo and the New York Aquarium and other organizations. They actually have 3,300 employees outside of the United States. We said, let's pick two areas, very different areas, and try different technologies. So we decided to go to Patagonia in Argentina, and we were working with transhumant goat herders. And these are families that are constantly moving from summer grazing lands to winter grazing lands by horseback. So we were going to use them as a pilot because we thought that the lanterns would be tested in the field, and it would be tough because they're going to be on horses. They're not going to be coddled, in other words. The other place we tested were two very small villages in rural Rwanda, down by the Burundi and DRC border, and these were remote, very remote to say the least. So what we did, we had 100 families in each one of these tests. We provided them with a solar lantern, one manufactured solar lantern for 3 months. We took that away. We tried the second lantern. We got their feedback. We also learned how much they were saving in time by having this. They weren't walking to charge cell phones. They weren't walking to gather firewood. They weren't walking to get to buy kerosene. They were able to use that time to be in the fields and grow more food. And we also wanted to know how much money they were saving too, because that was going to help us price how much we could charge these people. Because the last thing, again, we wanted, this would not be a giveaway program. People had to have skin in the game. They had to be invested. We'd seen too many examples of well-meaning not-for-profit organizations coming in and say, we've raised this money at our church, we've raised this money at our school, and we want to give you this solar lantern. Typically what would happen if you come back 2 weeks later, those solar lanterns had been taken apart, the copper had been sold for money, the components had been sold for money, to buy extra food or whatever, and a lot of times to buy alcohol, quite frankly, because that's certainly an issue that we deal with. But they were taken apart. But if people bought them, they respected them, they cared for them, and it was a much better situation. So we spent the next 6 months. I on a horse in Patagonia trying to find pneumatic goat herders as they were moving from one house to another, and it was tough, and we got a lot of good data from that. One of the things we learned was we're probably not going to do a project ever in Patagonia with pneumatic goat herders because we've got to have some density. You know, it took 5 hours to find a family by horseback, and then you get on the horse and you'd have to ride 4 or 5 more hours to find another family. We knew that we needed villages of about 100 families or more in order for this to make sense. So we then looked around, we said, who's doing this? Well, there were 2 organizations that we found. One was called Solar Sister, and they're based in Rhode Island. Catherine Lucy started this. She's a great lady, but it was just getting started. They had no track record at all. And I thought it was a very smart idea. What Catherine does is she empowers women, and it's using an Avon approach, if you will. A woman is given a backpack with 10 solar lights in it, and then she goes out and sells those lights in the community, keeps a percentage of what she sold, and then brings the money back and refills her backpack and goes out again. So women become the entrepreneurs and the salespeople, which I love the idea, but they weren't geared up yet. The other one was called Solar Aid, based in London. They are now the leader in the world doing this. Global BrightLight Foundation is the largest doing it in the United States, but they're the leader in the world. We talked to them. We even talked about merging because we're volunteers, and I have a virtual management team. We have a call every other Friday. I've got a technology person. I've got a communications person who runs communications for Purdue University. I've got a financial guy that works for Duke Energy. You know, we parsed out what we need that you typically have on a management team, except it's all volunteer and nobody gets paid. We like to be able to tell our donors that if you give a dollar goes right to the mission. It goes to the community, because I think that's real important too. So Jim and I reluctantly decided to form Global BrightLight Foundation. That's the bottom line. We contributed to the glut of not-for-profits, I guess, but we felt that we had a niche that we could really serve. And so we decided to focus on Rwanda because we had experience there and try to solve the problem. We knew, working with the government of Rwanda, and I don't know how much, I know people, 20 years ago, neighbor was killing neighbor in Rwanda, the genocide. And Paul Kagame is the president now, and he came in several years ago and said, look, we can wallow in the history of this country forever, or we can try to put that in the past and honoring it on a regular basis, what happened. But let's try to make Rwanda one of the most progressive, if not the most progressive countries in Africa. It's very welcoming to outside business coming in. It's very wired in the cities. They're working a lot on education. We actually are working with a network of 4,400 health workers around the country because, you know, you had women assisting in births with a candle or a kerosene light, and having a solar light with the level of light it provides really makes a difference. So we decided to focus on Rwanda. We knew that there were 1.2 million families without access to electricity in Rwanda out of a total of 9 million people in the country. We knew that if we wanted to eliminate the kerosene lamp in Rwanda by 2020, we knew how many lamps we needed to sell each year, how many salespeople we had to have out there. So we really had, I thought, a good, solid business plan in order to solve that problem, realizing the government was going to take care of some of that problem. And so we launched that project. A few months after that, Jim Rogers, Duke's chair and CEO, became the president of the Global Sustainable Electricity Partnership, which is comprised of the 16 largest utilities in the world. You've got State Grid of China, Russ Hydro in Russia, Electrobras in Brazil, Électricité de France in France, RWE in Germany, the biggest utilities. They adopted Global BrightLight Foundation. It was a wonderful gift to us. They adopted us as their project for the year. They each decided to donate $100,000. So we all of a sudden were funded and we could move forward in a major way. Last year alone, we provided 350,000 people with light in their homes, which was extraordinary, making us the leader in the United States. But it was a one-year commitment. And the caveat that came with it, which was a challenge, was that the companies decided that they wanted to tell us where we should be working. So rather than focus on one country and try to solve the problem there and then move on, they said, we want you to work in Nepal, Rwanda, Uganda, Zambia, Guatemala, Haiti, Peru, and Bolivia. I don't know if that's enough, but that is enough, believe me. So it was a challenge because we were maybe selling 5,000 lanterns in one place and 10,000 in another country. And I was racking up way too many airline miles, kind of stuffing myself in the seat and turning off my brain for those 20-hour flights places. And, you know, I thought this is too much work for minimum impact, and we really need to focus in. So when that wonderful gift came to an end, we were still raising money and we're, you know, applying to USAID and some of these other organizations. What we decided to do was to really focus in back on Rwanda and possibly one other country. And we're looking actually at Peru as the other country and try to solve the problem there. If we're successful in doing that, it would be wonderful, and then we can look at something else. So what we use is this very simple device. This is the solar panel. It's this big. I set this out when the sun came up this morning at my house, and then this is the lamp. Now it's got a nice, you know, place where you can hold it, and this is if you have to go out at night, go to the tree, want to check for animals around the hut, whatever. It also, and I'm going to pass this around so you can look at it, but it's also got where the panel plugs in, and then it's also got two USB cables. This is a brand new one that just came out last month, but it's got two USB cables because we now find that iPhones are working their way into remote areas of Africa, some of the first iPhones. So USB cables are important for that, and some people have radios that need USB. But anyway, this is this product, and it also comes with a stand, which is kind of interesting. The stand is this. And what it does is that you just attach it to the side of the device here. And then what it can do is it can stand up, and it could be a desk side. You can focus down if you're working at the desk. But what I've seen more people do, because they only have one of these, is they put it on a rack here in the hut, and they hang it from 5 minutes, and it becomes a full lighted room. It's got 3 levels of brightness. See, it's got a low, medium, high. And really, when it's on high, and you're in a dark place, it lights up the room. Foot clients, read clients, families visit after dark. And these are families whose lives are dictated by the sun came up and the sun came down. And all of a sudden, it extends so much. Their working day, their social day, their cooking, and you know, especially the women, they say it's such a pleasure to be able to see when you're cooking what you're cooking. And so anyway, this is kind of the device. This costs $17.85 at the factory in Shenzhen, China. We tried desperately to find somebody in the United States to manufacture this. We went to Owens Corning, which used to have manufacturing plants in Ohio and New York, thinking that because they're not manufacturing what they used to manufacture, they might be able to support the plant. We got the prices back, and it's just astronomical compared to what the folks in Japan are doing. This is actually a U.S. company. 3 19-year-olds from the University of Illinois invented this. They took their first batch to India 10 years ago. I mean, it was very elementary at the time. They tell the story of when it came off the conveyor belt and the luggage, the whole, you know, the cardboard box burst apart. Lights and tubes and everything were all over the place, but they finally got it all together. They took it to this village in India where they just wanted to have people test it and give their impressions of it. And within a week, people said, "Tell us how much you want for this. This is incredible. It changes our lives." And that's how they started the company. It's called BrightLight Planet. It's based in Illinois, but they do manufacture in Shenzhen, China. And the other company that we've used in the past is called Barefoot Power, and it's based in Australia. Interestingly enough, they manufacture in the same factory in Shenzhen. I wanted to see where our products were coming from, and I went there, and like one day they manufacture this product on the line, and the next day on the same line they manufacture somebody else's product. So they're somewhat similar, but I just thought I'd pass that along. costs $18.75 at the factory, but by the time we ship it, it's shipped by sea. By the time you take customs and go to Africa, it goes to Dar es Salaam, and then you have to transport it over land to Gali, pay customs at each border. It usually comes out to about $30 by the time we get it to the site. And then we do provide a small commission to our salespeople out there, so it's about a $35 product. But you know, my feeling is the $35 product that transforms people's lives. They're never the same after they get it. There's a lithium battery in there, and the life on that battery is about 4 years. The manufacturer says 5 years, but we found it's more like 3 or 4. What we've also found, though, is that 3 or 4 years, the technology changes so quickly that typically there's another, better, much cheaper product that's out there. It does bring up the question, which may be your next question, is what do you do about the disposal of the old? And we do collect them, and there is a recycling area in Kigali in Rwanda that we're able to accommodate that. But I see that as a huge, huge problem because Solar A, the other company I was telling you about, they're selling 100,000 a month. So disposal is going to be an issue that we really do need to address. Yeah. That's a very good point. Very good idea. And I don't know that that's been thought of. That's like, yeah, good idea. So anyway, that's the product that we use. You know, the way it changes people's lives is pretty simple. I mean, these are the kerosene lanterns that people use. They just find old cans and then convert them to kerosene light. And obviously, you've got much, much better health because you're not smelling the fumes, and it's not affecting your vision. It's not affecting your breathing. Another way, obviously, is education. Kids can study, they can read at night, and it's having an impact, and I'll talk about that in a minute through some of the research that we've done. It's also safety. I mean, this is actually a resin torch that was used in Cambodia, and I mean, it's resin from the trees that they wrap around a branch, and they burn it inside their house, and it causes an incredible number of fires. And the kerosene lamps too, if they're spilled over, they cause a lot of burns too, especially with children. So having that clean solar really eliminates that issue that we deal with too. The other one, this is in Patagonia, in some of the goat herders, one of the goat herders' homes. You can see the wood burning stove inside with the kind of the exhaust going out. They did have some kerosene lamps, but those hadn't worked for a while. But economic development, and you find that a lot of people do have kind of micro industries, and they may be making baskets, they may be making jewelry, something, but it does allow the workday to extend past sundown, which is really wonderful as well. And then it's a small item in a way per lantern, but I think collectively it's having a bigger impact. It's just a slightly cleaner environment that we're providing, and actually some of the companies are now looking at carbon credits, because once you get 100,000 lanterns out there, you can apply for a carbon credit, and it's a way to produce a little bit more revenue to buy more lanterns. I wanted to, before I take any more questions, I wanted to show you this short video. This is a project that we did in the Kaziba refugee camp in Rwanda. There are 5 camps in Rwanda, and it's kind of ironic calling these camps. These are from refugees from the Congo. And the first time I went there a couple of years ago, I met this young woman, Faraha, and she, I think, was 17 at the time. She had come to the camp as a 2-year-old, and her brother was then born there. Her mother had subsequently died. Her grandmother had died, so she was really taking care of her brother. And it was, I went into it's a 2-room mud hut. It was immaculate. She'd cut out of newspapers some pictures to have some art on the wall. But I mean, talking to her, there was no light in her eyes at all. I mean, they were dead. And I said, in, I guess, simpler terms, basically, what are your aspirations? What are your hopes for the future? And she couldn't answer that. I mean, she couldn't answer it. And what we found in this camp of 18,000 people with 12 public latrines was that girls, when they would, women and girls, when they would go to the latrine at night, were just routinely raped, sexually assaulted. They would not scream. They would not yell out, because if somebody found out that you had been raped, it's a stigma against you, and you would have no opportunity ever of being married, so they would suffer in silence. There was no ventilation in these places because there had been problems with crime and burglary, and so the windows were kind of slits in these homes, and it was just really eye-opening. There was no light at all in this camp, and there was really no economy. The economy consisted of once a month you got a food ticket and you got your ration for the month, and then some people would take that part of their food ration and sell it for what else they needed, but then inevitably that fourth week of the year, of the month, they didn't have enough to eat. So then what happened was some of the girls would go out and engage in prostitution outside of the camp. And you call it a camp, but it's not a camp. When you're in a camp for 18 years and the second generation's being born there, it becomes a community. And nobody has an idea of when you can go home to the Congo because of the continuing conflict there. So it was really, it was an eye-opening, it was a very disturbing visit to this camp. And so we got to thinking, could we use some of the funding that we had received to provide every family in this camp with a solar light? And it went against everything that we said we were going to do. We're not a giveaway program. We don't do things for free. But I thought there's got to be a way that we can figure out a way to provide these people with a lamp. And so what we negotiated with the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, was that a lot of these people had been going outside of the campgrounds, and they would cut down trees in order to get firewood. And they were huge deforestation problem around there. The other thing, the schools needed more volunteers. They needed safety proctors to accompany women and girls to the bathroom, the latrines at night. They needed cleanup, a cleanup brigade. And so what we decided to do was, in exchange for 40 hours of volunteer service in the camp, you earned your lantern. So they would have some skin in the game, they would have some investment in this, and they would value it. So that's ultimately what we ended up doing. So let me just play this.
Ndi umukongomani twahunze muri 1996. Bitewe n'intambara. Uro tukaba turi hano mu nkampi ya Kiziba mu ntara y'Iburengerazuba.
Sinkuka imyaka ariko twageze 96. Nari mfite imyaka 3. Muri nzu tubamo turi abantu babiri. Umusaza wanjye afite imyaka 12. Ntabo. Ababyeyi banjye barapfuye. Umwijima ibyo ko niyumvisha, ariko umwijima nyine ni mubi, kuko nyine nkuko nabivuze ushobora gutuma uhura n'impanuka nyinshi zitandukanye. Buryo nk'urugero ushobora kuguherekeza nk'umwana ko kuri toilette ashatse kuri toilette nka nijoro akaba asitaye nko ku giti bitewe no kubura urumuri, yarangiza akavunika, akaba ari njye bigora kujya kumuvuza, nta bushobozi.
I'm working here as a GBV coordinator. GBV means gender-based violence. We receive cases of rape, when people are going to the toilet at night, when it is too dark. On the way, they are not safe because they don't have right to see, but also if they have that right, they can know who has done this. That person also can be afraid a little bit more to violate them because they know that they will be known.
In the camp, we don't have any electricity. The place gets extremely dark at night. And if you look at the housing that refugees are living in, we're talking about small mud shelters. Only a few of them have windows, so within the house it gets very dark even during the day. So really having light there makes a tremendous difference. We have obtained 3,700 lamps from Global BrightLight Foundation, and we have roughly 3,670 households.
nkaba ndi umwe mu bayobozi bahagarariye ivillage ziri mu nkambi, ivillage muri quartier ya mbere, village ya gatanu. Guhugurwa hariya mutubwira ukuntu akamaro k'ariya tara n'ukuntu rikoreshwa.
The whole distribution exercise actually has happened in different phases. Initially, we trained some of the refugee leaders on how to properly use the lanterns, also sensitize them like, this is going to make a tremendous impact on your life, on your security. So there was this whole awareness component first.
Nyuma yaho mutubwira ko dutangira kuja kwigisha abantu yuko abantu nyamwinshi amatara menshi yagombaga guhabwa abantu yari aya Sun King Solo, aba ariyo tuja kwigisha muri population zose. Tuhageze tubigisha ukuntu bagomba kuryasa, tubigisha n'ukuntu bagomba kuricaginga kuzuba, kugeza uko imyasa n'ituru rigenda imyasa n'imbere garira gatanu ngo bafashe umuriro ufatika, n'ukuntu baryasa n'injoro bagiye kuva ku kibazo c'amabuji n'umwijima bakabonye.
icyo yadufashije kumenya kuricana nyine, aho gukanda nyine turakanda rigatanga umucyo mutoya, twakana ubwa kabiri rigatanga umucyo nyine uruseho, twakana ubwa gatatu hakaza umucyo mwinshi.
Today we're day 3. We go for quartier 6, and you can see that at the desk 1, it's this one, we'll serve village 1 and village 4. And we'll serve a total of 137 lanterns at this desk. Okay. Right?
An individual would come, we would check their identity, they have a proof of registration with a picture. Each refugee would be handed a token, and then we will call one by one and distribute the lamp. Each lamp has a serial number, so that we can track, actually we know which household has obtained which lamp, and this will help us now to monitor the usage of the lamp, or if a lamp gets stolen or lost, it will facilitate the tracking of the lamps.
hari ukuntu nyine twabaga turi mu mwijima mwinshi, ukiyemeza ukagurisha nk'ikibakuri cy'impungure, ukagura buji, ariko ntabwo tuzongera kuzigurisha, tuzirya kubera ko twabonye amatara.
Isha impungure kugira ngo agure peteroli, none buno nta kizigurisha, ahubwo zitekera abana bakazirya, agacana rino tara rero.
Nakoze cyambere kimara kubona itara, naragenda ricana, bukeye bwaho nongera ndashiraho bwa kabiri, nyuma yaho naje gushiraho telefone, iyi telefone yanje ari y'umudamu, turishiraho ubuntu, urumva amafaranga bigiye mwambwiraga.
You walk through the camp, you would see like solar panels on almost every roof. At night you would see women and children going to the latrines with the lamp. You would see students studying after dark. You would see family having their meal together in the evening and actually have light. The project is amazing. It has brought light to Kiziba camp.
none buno nabyishimiye yuko njya mu nzu habona nkaryatsa nkajya kuryama nkabona ari nko hanze nkumva byishimiye.
C'est pour la première fois de passer dans une maison dont il y a, avec cette lampe, m'a aidé de songer à plusieurs choses, de penser à un avenir très soyeuse.
uko ibyishimo byanjye bimeze no mu yandi mago nuko naho barishimye kubera n'amajambere mbese n'amajambere